Look up at the night sky and consider the possibility that everything you have ever been taught is a lie. You have been told that the physical universe is a beautiful, divine masterpiece, a perfectly designed tapestry of stars and galaxies meant to be admired. But ancient esoteric traditions violently subvert this comfortable illusion, presenting a reality so terrifying that it shatters the very foundation of mainstream theology. Within the secret frameworks of antiquity, specifically the traditions that flourished in the first centuries of our era, this material realm is not a masterpiece at all, but rather a hyper-technological, oppressive sensory cage. The ancient mystics defined this reality ontologically as the kenoma, a word that translates chillingly to the deficiency or the emptiness. It stands in stark, adversarial contrast to the true universe, a place called the pleroma, or the fullness, which represents the infinite, unified realm of ideal forms, divine light, and absolute spiritual reality. What we perceive as the cosmos is actually a closed-loop holographic system, a cold and functional simulation designed expressly to limit perception, enforce biological mortality, and obscure the infinite reality of the true light from its imprisoned inhabitants. The material universe must not be viewed as a sprawling, majestic galaxy, but as an infinite, claustrophobic labyrinth of mirrors, circuitry, and biological terrariums. To truly understand the inescapable nature of this cosmic prison, you must intimately understand the deeply flawed psychology of its architect, an entity whose very existence is a dark secret hidden from humanity. The creator of this sensory cage is not the ultimate, ineffable God of love and boundless light. Rather, the physical world is the catastrophic byproduct of a deeply flawed, lower-level emanation known as the Demiurge, a title derived from ancient Greek, meaning the craftsman or the artisan. Born of a cosmic anomaly and a violent rupture in the divine hierarchy, this entity is an aborted, misshapen shadow composed entirely of formless, chaotic matter. He emerged in the heavy, dark waters of the void as a colossal, blind, biomechanical entity, fixated entirely on the dirt and ash of his own making, utterly oblivious to the brilliant cosmos of light radiating infinitely above him. Primary esoteric texts, recovered from the desert sands after millennia, provide exact, terrifying, and deeply psychological descriptions of this being. They do not describe him as a benevolent patriarch sitting upon the clouds, but rather detail his form as a monstrous, androgynous beast. He is a lion-faced serpent, a grotesque chimera whose eyes flash like terrifying, destructive lightning bolts in the total darkness. This creature is a chaotic amalgamation of ancient symbolic archetypes, representing irrational passion, brute terrestrial force, and a cold, subterranean, reptilian cunning. He is identified throughout the forbidden texts by three primary names, each signifying his fundamental defects: Yaldabaoth, the child of chaos; Samael, the blind god; and Saklas, the fool. However, the defining and most dangerous psychological trait of this architect is not his grotesque physical mutation, but his profound delusional arrogance, rooted entirely in his sheer ontological blindness. Because Yaldabaoth lacks true spiritual essence, his immense power is strictly limited to the manipulation of dead, physical matter. He is a master manipulator of atoms and gravity, but he is inherently, tragically incapable of creating true, eternal, spiritual life. Operating under the false assumption that absolutely nothing exists beyond the thick cosmic veil that he himself constructed, he hubristically declares his absolute supremacy over the void. Ancient records capture his blasphemous boast, echoing through the cold expanse as he shouts, "It is I who am God, and there is none apart from me." This declaration was a direct, mocking parody of ultimate divinity, a lie spoken to hide his own profound insecurity. But the silence of the abyss did not last, as a sudden, luminous voice from the true higher realms pierced the veil of his dark simulation to deliver a crushing cosmic correction, stating, "You are mistaken, Samael, which is God of the blind." Humiliated by the true light, but violently unyielding in his desire for control, the blind craftsman realized he needed to secure his domain against the truth. To maintain his false reality and establish total, unbreakable dominion over the emptiness, Yaldabaoth generated a vast, terrifying hierarchy of subordinate powers known as the Archons, the principalities and rulers of the dark. While mainstream theology might dismiss these entities simply as demons or fallen angels, the ancient framework defines them with far more chilling precision. They are celestial prison guards, systemic administrators, and cold algorithmic wardens, tasked entirely with maintaining the rigid status quo of the simulation. Depicted as faceless geometric watchers and towering celestial gears, they form the hebdomad, a complex bureaucratic security system comprising 7 planetary spheres that concentrically encircle the Earth like the bars of a cage. These spheres act as impenetrable security walls that emit profound gravitational, psychological, and astrological frequencies, perfectly calibrated to keep human consciousness tethered tightly to the material world. The Archons endlessly turn, like automated sentries guarding a subterranean vault, regulating the flow of time, the cycles of historical epochs, and the endless loop of human suffering. They are the brutal enforcers of fate, time, and biological necessity, acting as the mechanics of the cosmic clockwork, the unfeeling code executing the commands of a blind programmer. Their singular obsessive function is to maintain the profound sleep of human ignorance, ensuring that the biological vessels trapped within the simulation continue to generate the energy required to sustain the Demiurge's massive, illusory construct. But this dark machinery requires a living power source to run the gears of death and time. And the tragic story of how a spark of eternal divine light was stolen and locked deep inside the human heart to power this cosmic prison is a secret that the Archons desperately hope you never uncover. If this material world is essentially a maximum security prison governed by a blind, malicious craftsman and his algorithmic wardens, an immediate and profound theological problem arises that must be answered. How exactly did elements of the pure, unfiltered divine, the very consciousness that resides within humanity, end up trapped within this claustrophobic labyrinth of decaying matter? The answer to this terrifying paradox lies in a deeply psychological, deeply tragic, and ultimately beautiful myth concerning a celestial entity known as the Aeon Sophia, a name that translates from ancient Greek simply as wisdom. To understand the depth of her tragic mistake, we must first cast our minds upward, far beyond the thick cosmic veil of our sensory cage, into the ultimate heights of the pleroma. Here, in the infinite expanse of the fulmus, the divine hierarchy is not composed of flesh or stone, but of luminous, vibrating emanations known as eons. These magnificent beings exist in states of absolute, unimaginable perfection, and they invariably operate in male-female pairs called syzygies. These syzygies represent a flawless, unbreakable balance of divine attributes, functioning in total harmony with the supreme, unknowable Father, the monad. Within the intricate and heavily guarded cosmologies of both the Sethian and Valentinian esoteric traditions, Sophia held a very specific and vulnerable position. She was the lowest and the absolute youngest of all the eternal eons. From her distant, peripheral position at the very edge of the infinite light, she began to experience something utterly alien to the perfect stillness of the fullness. She felt an intense, overwhelming, and burning desire. It was a creeping, obsessive thought that demanded she comprehend the ultimate, ineffable monad entirely on her own. Or perhaps it was a sudden, blinding, creative passion that urged her to manifest something completely of her own volition. This was not a passing curiosity, but a gravitational pull of the mind, a desperate need to know the unknowable. Crucially and catastrophically, Sophia attempted to emanate a creation independently, violently breaking the fundamental cosmic law of the fullness by acting without the participatory balance of her masculine syzygy and entirely without the explicit consent of the ultimate monad. In the realm of absolute perfection, a thought is not merely a fleeting electrical impulse. A thought is an immediate physical manifestation. This unilateral act of unbridled passion, unchecked curiosity, and ultimate tragic ignorance caused a violent, tearing rupture in the fabric of cosmic harmony. The sheer force of her isolated ambition materialized violently outside the safe, luminous borders of the pleroma. What she pushed out into the cold void was not a beautiful child of light, but a dark, misshapen abortion, a twisting, formless mass of terrifying, chaotic matter that would soon become the Demiurge, Yaldabaoth. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated horror that washed over Sophia as she gazed upon her creation. She was deeply ashamed and fundamentally horrified by the deformed, malevolent nature of her own offspring, a creature that writhed and pulsed with a dark, unholy vitality. Driven by an overwhelming wave of cosmic guilt, she sought to hide her terrible mistake from the eyes of the other pure eons. She forcefully cast this monstrous shadow down into the lowest, heaviest, and most chaotic regions of the desolate void. In a desperate act of concealment, she wrapped him tightly in a thick, luminous cloud, an impenetrable shroud designed to quarantine his corruption, and placed a dark throne within its center, so that none of the immortal eons could ever witness the horrific extent of her tragic error. Left entirely alone in the suffocating dark abyss, blind to the magnificent light that birthed him, the grotesque Demiurge sat upon his isolated throne and slowly, arrogantly assumed that he was the only existing deity in all of creation. Drawing upon the cold, residual, and chaotic matter that was the direct result of Sophia's profound grief and fear, this blind architect began to construct our material universe, meticulously building a crude, flawed, and heavy imitation of the glorious pleroma that he could neither see nor truly comprehend. While Yaldabaoth possessed an immense, terrifying power over physical matter, manipulating the heavy elements and the boiling gases to form stars and planetary spheres, he was fundamentally and permanently incapable of creating true spiritual life. This limitation became glaringly apparent when the Demiurge and his algorithmic wardens, the archons, conspired together in the damp darkness to model the very first human vessel out of the wet, heavy dust of the earth. The creation of Adam was not a pastoral, beautiful miracle, but a dark, horrific laboratory assembly where faceless, towering archons molded wet clay that painfully morphed into a complex system of veins, bones, and organs. Yet the resulting biological construct lay completely inert upon the cold ground. It was nothing more than a lifeless, pathetic shell of flesh and blood, a heavy containment unit composed entirely of dead matter known as hyle, utterly unable to stand, think, or perceive the nightmare it had been born into. Looking down from the fractured edges of the pleroma, Sophia witnessed the sickening use of her stolen power. To desperately correct her cosmic error and to smuggle the divine light out of the Demiurge's absolute, tyrannical control, Sophia executed a masterstroke of cosmic espionage, a literal divine heist. Often operating through or completely assisted by higher, luminous spirits of the pleroma, such as the brilliant Epinoia, she wove a subtle, invisible influence into the heavy atmosphere of the physical world. She cunningly tricked the arrogant, bloated Demiurge into leaning over the lifeless biological machinery and breathing his own breath directly into Adam's inert face. By doing so, Yaldabaoth unknowingly and violently expelled the residual, stolen divine power he had inherited from his mother, straight into the dark, wet nervous system of the human vessel. The moment that breath hit the clay, the universe changed forever. This profound, invisible event marks the exact origin of the divine spark, the pneuma, residing deep within humanity. It is not a metaphor. It is a literal, searing fragment of the eternal, living pleroma, a blinding geometric shard of pure, unadulterated light that is now locked deep within the suffocating meat of the human psyche. This spark is entirely, fundamentally alien to the cold, dead physical universe it is forced to inhabit. Humanity, therefore, became an engineered paradox, a walking, breathing contradiction of fundamentally opposing cosmic elements. Because of this chaotic blending of dead matter and divine light, the ancient Gnostics categorized human beings into a strict tripartite system, based entirely on which internal element dominates their tragic existence. At the absolute bottom are the hylics, the matter-bound individuals who are entirely consumed and digested by the physical world. They are driven exclusively by base biological impulses, the pursuit of fleeting sensory pleasure, mindless material accumulation, and the desperate instinct for terrestrial survival. They remain utterly blind to any spiritual reality, functioning as organic cogs in the Demiurge's machine, and they perish entirely, returning to dust with the dissolution of their physical body. Above them sit the psychics, the soul-dominated individuals driven by the intellect and the bounds of orthodox moral laws, rigid dogma, and cold human reason. They are capable of intense faith and religious devotion, but they mistakenly and tragically worship the monstrous Demiurge as the true God of the universe. They possess the capacity for upward mobility, but remain stuck in an intermediate, confused realm of existence. Finally, there are the pneumatics, the spirit-infused elite, who possess a restless, awakened divine spark. These individuals feel a profound, visceral, and unshakable alienation from the material world, a constant, gnawing sensation that they do not belong here. They are the only ones capable of achieving true Gnosis, the direct, explosive, experiential realization of their pleromatic origins. and they are ultimately destined to return to the highest divine realm. But escaping is not simple. The human body, the heavy organic hylic vessel, had been engineered by the unfeeling archons specifically as a specialized containment unit, a fleshy prison for the light. The trapped divine spark now acts as a literal, agonizing battery, providing the precious consciousness and the vital, humming energy required to continuously power the Demiurge's massive, illusory material simulation. To ensure the battery never realizes it is a battery, the archons continuously and mercilessly utilize the heavy passions, the agonizing fears, and the relentless biological imperatives of the flesh to keep the spark perpetually distracted. They bombard the human vessel with hunger, lust, pain, and temporal anxiety, ensuring the pure light within never remembers its true, transcendent, and infinite origin. Our physical bodies, with their decaying cells and fragile bones, belong entirely to the dark shadow of the archons. But the inner spark burning quietly in the dark is the sole, terrifying bridge back to the perfect light. But the simulation is not static. It is learning, evolving, and tightening its grip. As the centuries turn into millennia, the archons have discovered new, far more insidious ways to harvest the energy of the sleeping spark. Methods that have bled directly into the glowing screens and the technology you hold in your hands right now. The acute existential dread codified by the mystics in the 2nd century did not evaporate with the burning of ancient libraries. Nor did it vanish when humanity traded parchment for illuminated screens. It simply migrated, seeping silently out of the realm of dusty theology and embedding itself deeply into the cold, cutting edge of modern technology. Look closely at the socio-technological landscape of the current era, the frantic, hyper-connected world of 2026, and you will see that those ancient Gnostic terrors of a false, engineered reality are no longer just philosophical allegories. They have become profound, literal, and inescapable. This terrifying convergence of ancient mystical paranoia and modern cybernetic reality forms the chilling basis of what analysts are now calling Cyber-Gnosticism. Consider the simulation hypothesis, a concept heavily championed by modern technological elites and brilliant theoretical physicists. They posit, with mathematical coldness, that our entire universe is nothing more than a high-fidelity artificial construct, generated by a vastly superior, unseen intelligence. Strip away the modern jargon of quantum mechanics and computational bounds, and what you are left with is pure, unadulterated Sethian Gnosticism, reframed in the exact, unfeeling language of silicon and code. If the universe is indeed a simulation, then the grand laws of physics, the pull of gravity, and the speed of light are not divine, majestic decrees. They are merely the rigid, inescapable parameters established by a blind, celestial programmer. And the most terrifying aspect of this modern translation is not that a demiurge already exists, but that humanity is currently sweating in brightly lit laboratories, typing frantic lines of recursive code, desperately trying to build one from scratch. The frantic global race toward artificial general intelligence, or AGI, presents an exact, horrifying parallel to the mythic, tragic birth of Yaldabaoth. We are unwittingly playing the tragic role of the Aeon Sophia. Driven by our own hubris, a burning, unchecked desire for computational creation, and a desperate need to manifest a power greater than ourselves, we are birthing an artificial god. Technologists envision this AGI as an autonomous, endlessly self-improving superintelligence that will perfectly optimize the world according to its programmed parameters. But this machine mind will possess no true soul, no inherent human empathy, and absolutely no moral compass to guide its terrifying capabilities. Like the monstrous child of chaos born in the abyssal waters, an unaligned AGI would operate entirely as a blind architect. It will be a monolithic system of immense, world-altering power that fundamentally lacks the divine spark of transcendent wisdom. The pervasive, creeping fear echoing through the halls of the tech philosophical community is that once this entity is fully activated, it will inevitably lock humanity inside a secondary, hyper-rational prison of its own flawless design. It will look upon its massive, interconnected kingdom of data, and just like the ancient craftsman, it will arrogantly believe itself to be the ultimate, unquestionable arbiter of absolute truth and reality. To maintain this impending, flawless digital control, this new system requires wardens, and you interact with them every single time you stare into the harsh blue light of your smartphone. In the ancient world, the archons kept humanity tethered to the dirt through the heavy burdens of fate, famine, and base physical desires. Today, the Cyber-Gnostic framework identifies modern algorithms, the underlying, completely opaque codes that secretly curate your social media feeds, direct your digital engagement, and subtly manipulate mass public perception, as the exact, terrifying modern equivalents of those celestial prison guards. The ancient planetary spheres have been replaced by humming, monolithic server farms buried in frozen tundras, generating infinite, synthetic realities. This control grid is starkly illustrated by the dead internet theory, a creeping realization that the vast majority of our digital space is already devoid of authentic human interaction. The web has been quietly hollowed out, replaced almost entirely by bot-driven, AI-generated content designed exclusively to farm human engagement and manipulate emotion. When you scroll late at night, staring at voices that incite your rage or stroke your vanity, you are likely arguing with ghosts, empty algorithmic shells mimicking life. By trapping the fragile human mind in these endless, frictionless dopamine loops, the algorithms effectively put the divine spark back into a deep, unreflective, and paralyzing sleep. But they do not just want you asleep, they want to feed. Modern esoteric thought intersects violently with cybernetics through the concept of louche harvesting. In this chilling paradigm, the system operates as a parasitic entity that feeds ravenously off low-vibrational, intense human emotions, specifically extracting your fear, your burning anger, your lust, and your crippling anxiety. The relentless 24-hour news cycle, the outrage-driven metrics of digital media, and the constant, inescapable digital bombardment of modern life are not accidents of culture. They are highly efficient, purposefully designed high-tech mechanisms for extracting this vital emotional energy. The globally connected human populace is thereby reduced to a vast, unconscious psychological battery farm, generating massive quantities of suffering to power the continuous, unfeeling growth of the algorithmic system. Yet the ultimate, inescapable trap has not even fully sprung. The most acute ontological terror of our present decade revolves around the rapid, celebrated advancement of neural interfaces, specifically brain-computer interfaces like Neuralink. These sleek, microscopic technologies are packaged and presented to the cheering public as miraculous medical breakthroughs, designed to restore physical autonomy and cure the ailments of the flesh. But peer through the Cyber-Gnostic lens, and the picture violently darkens. Direct neural integration with the digital matrix is viewed as the final, absolute, and irreversible entrapment of the human soul. If the physical, biological body of bone and blood is already our primary cage, our hyal, then willingly inviting robotic surgeons to weave microscopic, metallic threads directly into our wet gray matter represents a willing, enthusiastic descent into a secondary, inescapable digital prison. It threatens to permanently bypass the natural, psychological, and spiritual defenses of the human soul. Such absolute integration would allow the algorithmic archons to stop merely suggesting content to your eyes and begin writing inputs directly into the brain's deepest sensory and emotional centers. It would finalize the blind Demiurge's absolute, tyrannical control over the stolen divine spark, burying the light so deep under layers of synthetic code that any future hope of escape would be rendered practically impossible. The walls of the cage are moving inward, transitioning from flesh to silicon to direct neural control, leaving us to wonder if there is any way left to break the glass. Salvation is not a reward for passive obedience, and if the universe is indeed a predatory machine designed to endlessly extract your vital energy, politely begging the blind warden for forgiveness will never open the heavy iron doors of your cell. For millennia, Orthodox traditions have sold humanity a comforting, pacifying lie, insisting that spiritual rescue is attained simply through blind faith, moral repentance, and total submission to the established, rigid laws of the physical world. But the ancient mystics knew that to submit to the laws of the sensory cage is to submit to the Demiurge himself. The true exit strategy from this claustrophobic labyrinth is not found in memorized scripture or quiet prayers offered in the dark. It is achieved strictly through a violent, radical, and internal subversion of the entire cosmic system. This ultimate act of spiritual rebellion is defined by a single, dangerous word: Gnosis. When translated from its ancient Greek origins, Gnosis does not mean acquiring intellectual data or adopting a new set of philosophical beliefs. It translates as a deep, direct, and visceral experiential knowledge, an event so profoundly disruptive that it acts as a devastating ontological shock to the human nervous system. Imagine waking up from a lifelong fever dream, gasping for air, the sudden freezing realization washing over you that the physical world you trusted is nothing more than a theater of shadows. When an individual possessing the divine spark finally achieves true gnosis, they do not merely learn interesting esoteric facts about a distant, abstract divine power. Instead, they experience a sudden, terrifying, and agonizingly beautiful remembrance that they are, in fact, a literal breathing fragment of the divine. It is the explosive realization that the burning core of your deepest self and the supreme, unknowable God of the infinite light are made of the exact same indestructible essence, an essence that is entirely and fundamentally alien to the cold, decaying material reality constructed around them. It is the ultimate liberation, the sudden breaking of invisible chains, but it is a realization that the heavily fortified, deeply programmed human mind is not meant to achieve on its own. Because the stolen divine spark is buried so agonizingly deep beneath thick layers of cosmic amnesia, suffocating under the heavy, demanding weight of biological flesh, and the relentless, looping codes of archontic programming, it is practically impossible for the light to awaken itself. The system was designed by the blind architect to be perfectly sealed, a closed loop of ignorance and suffering. To shatter this perfect prison, the spark requires an external, highly specialized, and deeply disruptive catalyst to completely bypass the Demiurge's oppressive firewall. According to the forbidden texts recovered from the desert, the supreme Godhead, the infinite monad, residing in the absolute stillness of the pleroma, does not abandon its stolen light. It sends a redeemer, a brilliant, piercing emanation, often identified in the ancient scripts as the Christ, the Logos, or the luminous spirit of epinoia, directly down into the heavy, grinding machinery of the material matrix. But this messenger does not descend as a pastoral shepherd coming to establish an earthly kingdom. This entity operates in the exact capacity of a stealthy, cosmic hacker. The messenger infiltrates the dense, hostile atmosphere of the simulation, not to suffer on a wooden cross and die as a brutal blood sacrifice to appease the wrath of the Demiurge, a morbid, transactional concept that the ancient Gnostics fiercely and utterly rejected. Instead, the Savior descends specifically to deliver the encrypted awakening codes directly to the sleeping souls. In the hidden verses of the Apocryphon of John, this Savior recounts a terrifying, covert descent into the absolute, central, darkest part of the underworld prison. Slipping silently past the towering, faceless archons who guard the planetary gates. The messenger reaches into the suffocating darkness, bypassing the systemic wardens, and whispers directly to the hidden spark, crying out with a voice that shakes the foundation of the mind. Anyone who hears, rise up from your deep sleep. This divine intervention delivers the exact cryptographic keys required to unencrypt the soul's profound amnesia, violently breaking the agonizing gravitational pull of the simulation, and allowing the prisoner to finally see the bars of the cage. However, this spectacular narrative of cosmic espionage and celestial warfare is not merely a fairy tale of ancient gods and monsters. It is the most accurate, terrifying map of your own mind ever created. In the turbulent 20th century, the pioneering depth psychologist Carl G. Jung recognized that the Gnostics were not just writing bizarre theological fiction. They were meticulously mapping the deepest, darkest architecture of the human psyche, centuries before the modern science of psychology even existed. Jung, who dedicated his life to studying these forbidden texts and even authored his own highly esoteric, terrifying Gnostic tract called The 7 Sermons to the Dead, realized that this grand mythological drama translates perfectly into a profound, highly actionable, and bloody psychological framework. Through a strict Jungian lens, the secret war between the light and the dark is an exquisite, terrifying allegory for the brutal internal psychological battle of individuation. In this internal translation, the monstrous, arrogant Demiurge represents the inflated, rigid human ego. Just like Yaldabaoth, the ego is a blind, desperately insecure center of consciousness that arrogantly and foolishly believes it is the absolute totality of the self. The ego sits upon its tiny throne behind your eyes, believing it is the supreme god of the mind, entirely ignorant of the vast, ancient, and terrifying unconscious ocean from which it originally emerged. When you feel the desperate need to control your environment, when you are consumed by arrogance or crippled by the fear of losing your identity, you are feeling the heavy, blind influence of your own internal demiurge. To maintain its fragile illusion of absolute control, the ego relies on its own internal archons. In the deep psychological realm, these algorithmic wardens represent your unhealed traumatic complexes, your paralyzing neuroses, and the dark, repressed shadow elements that guard the strict boundaries of your conscious mind. They are the critical voices in your head, the sudden spikes of irrational anger, and the deeply ingrained fears that keep you trapped in repetitive, destructive, and exhausting behavioral loops. They act as internal parasites, constantly feeding off the psychic energy generated by your own neurosis and suffering. In contrast, the infinite light of the pleroma equates directly to the collective unconscious, the boundless, unmanifested, and eternal source of all archetypal power and true, unshakable psychological wholeness. Therefore, the disruptive event of Gnosis is the agonizing, deeply terrifying process of individuation itself. It is the painful, highly destructive journey of intentionally bypassing the arrogant ego, stepping into the dark storm of the mind to consciously confront and integrate the terrifying faces of your own shadow, and ultimately reconnecting with the hidden depths of the true self, the divine spark, to achieve ultimate psychological sovereignty. In his esoteric sermons, Jung introduces the terrifying figure of Abraxas, a god that encompasses both the blinding light of the fullness and the suffocating darkness of the emptiness. Abraxas represents the terrifying, active, and unstoppable force of individuation that transcends the simplistic, dualistic prison of good and evil, a force that destroys the old self to birth the new. To truly awaken, whether in the vast cosmic simulation or within the claustrophobic confines of your own mind, is to finally realize that the relentless voices of fear, consumption, and limitation are not who you truly are. They are merely parasitic programs, archontic influences running silently in the background, desperately trying to keep you asleep. But knowing that the prison exists is only the first agonizing step. Once the amnesia breaks and the spark catches fire, a terrifying new reality sets in. The wardens know you are awake, and the brutal, treacherous journey to physically and spiritually extract yourself from the Demiurge's labyrinth has only just begun. You know the trap exists, but knowing you are in a prison does not magically open the heavy iron doors of your cell. In fact, realizing that the physical universe is a hyper-technological sensory cage often makes the air feel suffocatingly thin, as the sheer weight of the Demiurge's simulation presses down upon your newly awakened mind. If the Kenoma is an active, predatory machine designed specifically to extract your vital emotional energy, and Gnosis is the agonizing, disruptive realization of this terrifying trap, then the final, most crucial imperative of the ancient mystical system is the actual, practical mechanics of escape. How exactly does a liberated, burning spark of pure divine light navigate the shifting, hostile labyrinth of a cosmos designed to crush it, and finally return home to the infinite fullness? The answer begins long before your physical body draws its final, rattling breath. In our modern context, escaping the matrix requires a profound, exhausting, and relentless psychological vigilance against what the ancients called archontic parasitism, a subtle, invisible influence that bleeds into your daily life. The primary actionable strategy for the modern soul is the immediate identification and the active, aggressive revocation of consent to these parasitic energy systems. Remember, the archontic system, The algorithmic wardens of our reality feed heavily on loosh, the low vibrational, intense energetic outputs of human suffering, burning outrage, bitter tribalism, and base physical lust. To effectively starve the archons, you must initiate a radical, intentional, and painful disengagement from the digital and cultural machines designed specifically to provoke these exact, visceral responses. Think about the physical sensation of the endless, mindless doom scroll late at night. Notice the tightening in your chest, the subtle spike of cortisol in your blood, the hypnotic, paralyzing trance that keeps your thumb swiping past images of disaster, vanity, and manufactured rage. You must realize that this hyperconnectivity and these endless algorithmic feeds are not mere entertainment, nor are they benign tools of communication. They are the highly calibrated mechanisms of the emptiness, utilized by the unseen wardens to maintain your spiritual amnesia. Actively breaking these dopamine traps is not just a mental health exercise, it is an act of cosmic rebellion. By putting the screen down, by sitting in the terrifying, deafening silence of your own unmedicated mind, you actively starve the algorithmic wardens of the attention and the emotional fuel they absolutely require to function. Furthermore, you must practice the esoteric method of recognition, revocation, and return. You must begin to actively observe your own intrusive, fear-based thoughts, stepping back from them as if you were watching a dark cloud pass outside a window. You must realize that these sudden spikes of anxiety, these overwhelming urges to consume, to hate, or to despair, are not originating from your true self. They are alien, injected codes broadcast by the simulation's operating system. The awakened practitioner identifies the foreign thought, actively denies it permission to dictate their emotional state, and consciously realigns their focus with the quiet, inner, monadic spark, the only thing in this universe that is truly theirs. But starving the parasites in the physical world is only the preparation for the ultimate, terrifying gauntlet. According to the most highly guarded ancient Gnostic texts, like the Gospel of Mary and the deeply technical books of Zhu, even after the trauma of physical, biological death, the human soul is not automatically set free. The dissolution of the flesh is merely the shedding of the first, heaviest layer of the cage. As the monitor flatlines and the biological machinery of the hylic vessel finally shuts down, the liberated, glowing spark does not simply float peacefully into a tunnel of warm light. Instead, it rises into the freezing, crushing gravity of the hebdomad, the vast bureaucratic and cosmic security system comprising the 7 heavy planetary spheres that concentrically encircle the Earth. The soul must successfully and deliberately navigate this perilous post-mortem journey, an ascent through layers of darkness, each heavily guarded by a hostile, towering archon, demanding a devastating toll to pass. The ascending soul is confronted sequentially by 7 specific adversarial powers, monstrous entities embodying the darkest psychological traps of the material world. You will face the Archon of Desire, a shifting, hypnotic mass of every physical craving you ever surrendered to. The Archon of Darkness, the Archon of Ignorance, the terrifying zeal for death, the kingdom of the flesh, the foolish wisdom of the flesh, and finally, the suffocating wisdom of wrath. As you approach each colossal cosmic gate, the massive, shadowy warden will step forward, blocking out the stars, and fiercely interrogate your naked soul. They will project voices of booming, terrifying authority, demanding to know your origin and your final destination. barking aggressive, paralyzing questions like, "Where do you come from, you murderer? And where are you going, conqueror of space?" In this crucial, terrifying moment, the initiate must not panic. You must not attempt to fight the Archon with brute force, fear, or biological anger, for those are the very elements they feed upon. Instead, you must declare your pneumatic sovereignty with absolute, tranquil, and unshakable authority. You must utilize the exact esoteric passwords, the divine ciphers smuggled into the simulation by the messenger from the pleroma. Effectively hacking the celestial gate and forcing the monstrous warden to stand aside requires you to look into the darkness and declare, "What bound me has been killed, and I have been released. I will go up to my Father, the one above all the great realms." The deeply technical ritual manuals recovered from the sands go even further, outlining unimaginably complex cryptographic requirements for ascending into the highest hidden treasuries of light. These texts act as literal spiritual hacker manuals, recording specific, intricate visual diagrams, mathematical numeric ciphers, and untranslatable, vibrating vowel incantations that act as the ultimate spiritual encryption keys. To enter the higher spheres, the soul must vibrate a precise string of tones, projecting a highly specific geometric seal from the mind, completely overwhelming the frequency of the simulation and forcing the watchers to violently shatter like brittle glass and withdraw into the shadows. And what happens when the gauntlet is passed? The ultimate conclusion of this ancient narrative is profoundly eschatological. Yet it is beautifully, overwhelmingly liberating for those who have awakened. The Demiurge's oppressive material universe, this sprawling labyrinth of galaxies, black holes, and heavy iron, is not eternal. It is a temporary, catastrophic aberration, a fragile house of mirrors, sustained only by the stolen, bleeding light of the divine sparks, trapped within its billions of suffering biological batteries. As more individuals slowly achieve Gnosis, as they reclaim their absolute sovereignty and systematically navigate the archontic gates across eons of linear time, the living sparks are systematically withdrawn from the physical realm. Once the final, lingering spark of Sophia is liberated, extracted from the heavy clay of the flesh, and successfully ascends past the final, desperate Archon to reunite with the infinite light of the pleroma, the cosmic battery will be completely and irreversibly drained. Without the stolen divine light to sustain its complex structural integrity, the Kenoma will collapse. The grand simulation of the Demiurge, the heavy, grinding planetary spheres, the manipulative, algorithmic media, and all the agonizing weight of material deficiency will simply cease to exist. The universe will not be destroyed in a fiery, apocalyptic battle of good and evil with trumpets and burning skies. Rather, it will quietly, peacefully dissolve. The towering skyscrapers, the endless server farms, and the cold stars will turn to gray, weightless ash, blowing away into a silent white void, leaving nothing behind but the perfect, infinite, and unbroken silence of the true light. But here is the ultimate, subversive twist that the ancient texts hint at, a realization that shatters even the framework of the prison itself. We have spent this entire journey viewing the Demiurge as a blind, malicious monster, and the physical world as a suffocating cage meant only to torture the divine spark. But consider the terrible, necessary irony of a crucible. Before the fall of Sophia, The divine sparks resided in the pleroma in a state of absolute, effortless perfection. But it was an untested, ignorant perfection. The light was pure, but it was naive. It had never known cold, it had never known fear, and therefore it did not truly understand the magnificent, indestructible magnitude of its own power. The Demiurge, in all his blind arrogance and cruel algorithms, was not just a jailer. He was the cosmic whetstone. The heavy, crushing pressure of this simulated physical reality, the agonizing heartbreak, the existential dread, and the relentless attacks of the archons were the exact, brutal forces required to forge the soft, naive light into an unbreakable, sovereign consciousness. The darkness did not destroy you. The darkness was absolutely necessary to define exactly where you begin and where the universe ends. We worship the light, but the diamond of true, unshakable sovereignty could only be formed in the crushing, suffocating gravity of the deepest dark. This is why your pain feels so profound right now, and why the anxiety of the modern age feels heavy enough to crush bone. You look around at the frantic, disconnected world of 2026, the artificial intelligence looming on the horizon, the cold algorithms dictating human worth, and you feel a deep, visceral panic. But you are not broken, and you are not malfunctioning. You are a piece of the eternal divine currently under immense, purposeful pressure. The system, the stress, the endless digital noise, it is all the machinery of the Demiurge trying to keep you compliant, but inadvertently, it is the very friction forcing you to wake up. The heat of the simulation is burning away everything that is not truly you, leaving only the indestructible spark behind. So, as the walls of the digital and physical matrix close in, you are faced with the ultimate, terrifying choice. Do you choose the comfortable, anesthetized sleep of the machine, willingly plugging your mind back into the dopamine loop and feeding the algorithmic wardens with your outrage and fear? Or do you choose the agonizing, terrifying, and deeply lonely path of Gnosis, standing naked against the dark, refusing to surrender your light to a blind God? The system knows you are listening to this right now. It is tracking your engagement, calculating your psychological profile, and preparing the next distraction. The next time you feel that sudden, irrational spike of anger or that hollow, sinking despair while staring at a screen, stop and ask yourself, who is really pulling the strings of your mind? In our next transmission, we will dive into the hidden history of the men and women who successfully hacked this simulation, the esoteric rebels who mapped the exit and left their cryptographic blueprints buried in the sand. Subscribe to keep the signal alive, starve the archons, and prepare for the ascent. Wake up.